Abraham Lincoln was born on February 12, 1809 and died on April 15, 1865. Lincoln was the 16th president. He was also president during the Civil War and ended slavery. Although Lincoln had illiterate parents, his taste in reading was encouraged. Lincoln pursued becoming a lawyer and moved to the state's new capital, Springfield, Illinois. Within a few years of his relocation to Springfield, Lincoln was earning $1,200 to $1,500 annually at a time when the governor of the state received a salary of $1,200 and a circuit judge only received $750. When Lincoln first entered politics, Andrew Jackson was president. He disagreed with the Jacksonian view that the government should be divorced from economic enterprise. He later said, "The legitimate object of government is to do for a community of people whatever they need to have done, but cannot do at all or cannot do so well for themselves in their separate and individual capacities." The Republican Party nominated Lincoln for the presidency. He ran on a platform denouncing disunion and calling for an end to slavery in the territories. Lincoln won 40% of the popular vote and 180 of the 303 electoral votes. Lincoln won because the war turned in the North's favor during the campaign. Lincoln did not like the idea of slaves, but he did not want to totally get rid of the slaves either. Abraham Lincoln was on the road to getting rid of slavery. However, John Wilkes Booth was a slavery fanatic. Booth was angered by Lincoln and his doings and planned on abducting Lincoln on several occasions. John Wilkes Booth stalked Abraham Lincoln's every move. Booth tried to find places Lincoln would go to so Booth can plan his attacks there. Lincoln was planning on seeing a show with his wife at a theater, which is where Booth planned to kill him. John Wilkes Booth was born on May 10, 1838, near Bel Air. He was an actor and was born into a family of famous actors. He was also the assassin of President Abraham Lincoln. Although Booth had a deep hatred for President Abraham Lincoln and the Republican Party, he did not join the Confederate Army on the outbreak of the American Civil War. Instead of joining the Confederate Army, Booth worked as a secret agent and also helped to smuggle medical supplies from the North to the Confederate forces in the South. As a touring actor, Booth had the perfect cover for this work. Booth was a fanatical believer in slavery and the Southern cause. He wanted slavery very much, while Lincoln opposed slavery.
He made plans with co-conspirators to abduct Lincoln. He made several attempts that managed to fail, and then he vowed to destroy the president and his cabinet. In 1864, Booth devised a scheme to kidnap Abraham Lincoln in Washington. The plan was to take Lincoln to Richmond and hold him until he could be exchanged for the Confederate Army prisoners of war. Lewis Powell, George Atzerodt, John Surratt, and David Harold, Michael O'Loughlin, and Samuel Arnold were involved in the plot as well. Booth decided to carry out the plan on March 17, 1865, when Lincoln was planning to attend a flight at the 7th Street Hospital that was on the outskirts of Washington. The kidnap attempt was canceled when Lincoln decided at the last minute to cancel his visit. On April 9, 1865, General Robert E. Lee surrendered to General Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox. 2 days later, Booth attended a public meeting in Washington where he heard Abraham Lincoln make a speech where he explained his views that voting rights should be granted to some African Americans. Booth was furious and decided to assassinate the president before he could carry out these plans. Booth discovered that on April 14th, Abraham Lincoln was planning to attend the evening performance of Our American Cousin at the Ford Theater in Washington. Booth decided he would assassinate Lincoln while George Atzerodt and Lewis Powell would kill the Vice President and the Secretary of State. All attacks would take place at approximately 10:15 p.m. that night.
Lincoln made a speech about African Americans and slavery. Lincoln's speech angered Booth that led to the assassination. After Lincoln's speech, Booth decided to assassinate Lincoln so his plans from the speech cannot be carried out.
On April 14, 1865, he shot Lincoln during a performance at Ford's Theater. Booth, armed with a pistol and a hunting knife, arrived at the theater at about 10:30 p.m. He entered Ford's Theater soon after 10 p.m. and made his way to the state box. John Parker, Lincoln's bodyguard from Metropolitan Police Force, had left his position outside the state box to get a drink. Inside the state box were Abraham Lincoln, his wife Mary Lincoln, and two friends, Major Henry Rathbone and Clara Hatch. At 10:15 p.m., Booth entered the state box and shot Abraham Lincoln in the back of the head. When Rathbone attempted to grab Booth, he was slashed with a hunting knife. Then Booth jumped about 11 feet onto the stage below. He landed badly and snapped the fibula bone in his left leg just above the ankle. Booth hobbled outside as he waved his hunting knife at the audience and shouted, "This owes to the tyrants," and got on his horse and rode out the city. Even though Booth broke his legs jumping from the president's box, he was able to escape on horseback to a Virginia farm. Abraham Lincoln was rushed to a boarding house down the street for care. On April 26, Harold and Booth were found hiding in a barn near Port Royal, Virginia. It was known to be the largest manhunt in history. 10,000 federal troops, detectives, and police hunted for the killer. Booth was found 12 days later. Harold surrendered, but Booth refused to come out of the barn, so it was set on fire. In the ensuing chaos, a soldier shot and killed Booth. Booth has said to have whispered, "Tell my mother I would die for my country. I did what I thought was best." His last words were, "Useless, useless." He died on April 26, 1865, near Port Royal, Virginia.
Eight Lincoln conspirators were caught over the next few days and tried by a military court. They were found guilty on June 30th and given various sentences depending upon their involvement. Lewis Powell, David Harold, George Atzerodt, and Mary Surratt were charged with conspirating with Booth along various other crimes and hung on July 7, 1865. Dr. Samuel Mudd was charged with conspiring with Booth and sentenced to life in prison. Andrew Johnson eventually pardoned him in early 1869. Samuel Arnold and Michael O'Laughlin had conspired with Booth to kidnap President Lincoln and were found guilty and sentenced to life. O'Laughlin died in prison, but Arnold was pardoned by Johnson in 1869. Edmund Spangler was found guilty of helping Booth escape from Ford's Theater. Johnson also pardoned him in 1865.
The very next day after the shooting, Lincoln died on April 15, 1865. Approximately 7 million Americans, or almost one-third of the entire Union population, turned out to publicly mourn the matrix leader. Lincoln's body taken all over for public viewings where people can see him in his coffin. His coffin with the body has been to 180 cities and 7 states for these public viewings. In some cities, people waited in line for 5 hours or more just to see his coffin.
Lincoln's funeral train had his name and picture of him secured on the front of the engine above the cattle guard. His funeral train was called the Lincoln Special. The funeral train that carried Lincoln's body from Washington to his hometown of Springfield, Illinois, took 14 days for its journey. About 300 people accompanied Lincoln's body on the 1,654-mile journey, including his eldest son, Robert. Also on the train was a coffin containing the body of Lincoln's son, Willie, who had died in 1862 at the age of 11 of typhoid fever during Lincoln's second year in office. Willie's body had been removed from the ground in a plot in Washington, D.C. after Lincoln's death so he could be buried alongside his father at the family plot in Springfield. Scheduled stops for the special funeral train were published in newspapers. At each stop, Lincoln's coffin was taken off the train, placed on an elaborately decorated horse-drawn hearse, and led by solemn processions to a public building for viewing. In 1911, a prairie fire near Minneapolis, Minnesota, destroyed the train car that had so famously carried Lincoln's body to its final resting place. In Philadelphia, Lincoln's body lay in state on the east wing of the Independence Hall, the same site where the Declaration of Independence was signed.